crash. Let me see
You're
if it
right.
actually
It's all
works.
going to hell from here. Okay, well,
Yeah.
we are hypothetically live. So, welcome everyone. I am
Oh, actually,
Rachel
I'm
from the
live.
Creative Contessa, and this is my colleague and friend Philip from Irish Medieval History. And today we are here
Ooh.
to discuss tower houses in medieval Italy and Ireland because there seem to be a lot of similarities and also some key differences. So, let's have fun and geek out. Yeah, so
Ashkelon Grascalon, located here on the map.
Sorry, that's my side
oh,
for
like
blowing
what
up
is
there.
that?
I know, right? I just
Please
went
don't
over to
let it be
TikTok
me.
to see if my tickety talk.
Yeah. Okay. So and I also have the ability. We're testing out some new stuff here today, guys. So bear with us as we
I'm
go
testing out
through this
everything.
adventure
Yeah.
together. Right. So tower houses, so when tower houses seem to be a relatively late development in Ireland, right? Like you said, 15th, 16th century for the most part.
It's you see, this is where there's still a lot of just to confirm, right? So the solid if we were to go to court now, right,
Right.
and say with factual evidence when did the development of the tower house we know today come from, we would solidly say 15th century.
Right.
Okay, that's solid facts, and the influence with solid facts comes from the Norman invasion. So the Normans come in, and Lacey, who wants to make a huge statement. And so he goes off and he builds Trim Castle in the middle of Ireland, up around what was it called? The County of Meath, right? Which literally means middle of Ireland. When
Does
you're
it really?
translating it from Irish over to English and stuff. Yeah, that's literally Meath,
Wow. How
middle of
original.
Ireland, right?
Fantastic.
And so Hugh de Lacy, but Hugh does to make a huge statement that he's here, he's proud, have at it. And so he builds a massive castle. He builds the biggest castle in Western Europe at the castle. And from there, he's making a huge statement. And that's where the evolution of the Irish Tower House that we know today allegedly comes from.
Right.
However, you can make further arguments going back of the Irish already having Mount and Bailey castles in Ireland before the arrival of the Normans. However, we can't factually back that up for two reasons. First
Right.
off, literature-wise, we're already using the word castle before the arrival of the Normans into Ireland, and we're still using it throughout. So a fortification in Ireland would be considered a castle, but at the same time, when you have the Normans coming in and building their Moat and Bailey castles on the island of Ireland, that's also considered castle. So
Right.
trying to identify the difference between a Moat and Bailey castle and an old fortification from around 550 up to the arrival of the Normans in 1169 is very difficult to tell the difference, because we get influenced exactly the way the French get influenced with the word castle from the Italian influence. And the reason for that is because if you look at the Rock of Cashel in Ireland, you can see influences between the Roman fortifications around 390 to around up to around 450, even up to around 470. You can see the Irish are going into Britain, even northern France, raiding around that area, but they're also bringing back that information of fortifications into Ireland. And the Rock of Cashel is a very good example of that. So they're using, as you can see that with the Rock of Cashel, they're using the word Cashel, Castle. You can see how that word is developing. So, and that's, I'm pretty sure, you're obviously more qualified linguistic than I am. And I'm pretty sure by what historians and archaeologists are saying, in the French language, that's how it's developing. That word castle is developing as well with fortification.
Yeah, it's coming from the Latin word, which is castellum, which referred more to a sort of fortified compound, like a military base, basically, like a fortified military base, right? So you can absolutely see how castellum can easily morph phonemically speaking into cashel. Like that's not even hard.
Yeah,
And
it
in
really
fact, you
isn't.
said it was called the Rock of
Rock
Cashel,
of Cashel,
which
but
is
that I
really
think
funny
rock.
because
Yeah,
roc, that's the French word for fortress.
yeah,
So that's like the castle of Castle.
yeah, yeah.
That's
It's
pretty funny.
Yeah, it's brilliant though to actually study and sit down and actually look at like and see how the Irish are developing their castles, fortifications, and the way the Anglo-Saxons are developing their fortifications and stuff. Because I think now, once again, you can correct me on this one, Rachel. There's a different development of language with the Anglo-Saxon understanding of fortification, and then with the Southern French word castle, with the Moat and Bailey castles dotted
Right.
throughout. I think we can monitor the development of Moat and Bailey's easier with the literature in England than we can with Ireland. The second the
No, go on.
second biggest problem is archaeological finds, right? So first off, the Moat and Bailey castles are mostly built allegedly, or I have to say allegedly because we don't have anything to back it up, is allegedly built by the O'Connors, right? And there's
Right.
two problems with that. Where we can find where the O'Connors allegedly have their Moat and Bailey castles, so far doing archaeology digs in those areas, we haven't found anything, right?
Right.
And those are the ones who are kind of left alone to their own device. The majority of Moat and Bailey castles that were allegedly built by the O'Connors were then later occupied by the Normans, right? So they were built on top of the pre-existing Moat and Bailey castles that we have in Ireland. So it's very difficult to tell if the O'Connors were allegedly building Moat and Bailey Castle. But if you look at Rock of Cashel and the development there, in the Rock of Cashel, so what happens in the Rock of Cashel is that it's a proper fortification of the Roman style, and then obviously continuous Irish influences throughout until eventually we get up to around 1103. And I can't remember if it was yourself, Rachel, I was saying it to, or a good friend of mine I was saying it to. But regardless, in 1103, you have King Murtoch y Brien, right? King Murtoch O'Brien. And he wants to be recognized as King of Ireland to the Pope, right? And he does two major things there. He bans slavery in Ireland, which is a huge deal because slavery, Dublin, has the biggest slave market in all of Western Europe. The second big thing about that as well is the fact that, what was it called, which affects the economy, obviously. The second big thing with that as well is that he gives Cashel over to the papacy and it turns it into a monastic settlement, right? And from there, the McCarthys actually bring German architects over from the Holy Roman Empire over, well, Northern Germany at the time, depending on which way you are in the debate, architects over, and they start to build up on Cashel. And they're building architecture that's well more advanced than anything you'd see with a Moat and Bailey. Because if you look at Irish fortifications before the Moat and Bailey, in
Right.
around the 12th century, there's not much, except for adding the extra hill onto it. There's no massive leap in development to the fortifications that the Irish were already developing at the time anyway. So it makes sense that the Irish could easily build a Moat and Bailey castle. So from there, you could argue that the Irish were developing castles around the early 12th century.
Right.
But we don't have the evidence to back it up. So as you said there early on, 15th century is where we got solid evidence of the Gaelic building these gorgeous tower houses and that they
Right.
were influenced by the earlier Normans.
Well, it's very interesting because, the the reason the French have so many castles and the Germans and, a lot of Europe actually, in the northern part anyways, because of the Norse and their
Yeah.
mercantile adventures.
Mm,
Which is what prompted people to start really building serious fortifications. But of course, Ireland, kind of got settled and kind of made part of the Scandinavian Empire in loose terms, right? The sort of
mm,
mercantile network pretty early on. So it was almost like they had their own protection racket going.
yeah.
They they didn't need to build castles against themselves, so it makes sense that there just wouldn't be a massive demand for them the way there
Well,
was an absolute demand for them in, latter
mm,
end of the millennium, first millennium, sort of the rest of Europe. And then the southern part of Europe, is building castles for a completely, different set of invaders and
Mm.
foes.
The
Um,
thing
yeah,
about development, yeah, it's very interesting that you hit a point there, because although ring forts aren't developed between 550 to around 1169 with the arrival, well, I would actually take it way back before then, just around the 11th century. The reason why fortifications, the ring
mm,
forts, the farmstead ring forts are developing the way they are is more prevention against raiding rather than
right,
protecting the people inside. No, don't get me wrong. When I say raiding, I mean also protecting the women. So it was protecting the cattle, it was protecting the goods, and it was protecting the women. So you'd have a common ringstead, what was that? Farmstead ring fort, which were dotted all around the islands, which are small little fortifications. They wouldn't last an actual siege, but they
right,
would last long enough for another war band to come in and push away these skirmish raiders, right?
right.
And so these are dotted all over the island. And basically, they're just ring forts,
Yeah.
enough room for the cattle. The house, as you can see there, the house in between, this is a really shitty one because they would need to be like a tower, everything. Like, this is, I don't know what the hell this is. But this would need a tower, higher walls. And then under the house here would be what you call a souterrain, right? And what is a souterrain? A souterrain is kind of like a medieval fridge. You dig underground and it would keep all the food and all the
Yeah.
objects that you want to keep cool or just hide away, which is swords and goods and stuff, hidden under the house, right?
Yeah. The
And you would
larder.
also, and so when when the skirmishers would come in, the raiders would come in and stuff, the
Mm,
women and children would hide in the souterrain, and they would
right.
actually, somewhere around here, because these are underground, somewhere around here there'd be like a peeking hole for them to peek out and hear what's going on around them. So let's say if the skirmishers got knocked away, they'd be able to hide down here, but also they'd be also able to know if their own menfolk were killed, right? Which is
Right.
really handy,
Yeah.
because then
So
they knew to stay there permanently until the raiders went away.
right. Which, as you said, it's a different, we say in the military, threat force.
Yeah.
Right. It's a your rude and inconsiderate neighbors coming and trying to steal your crap is not the same as, you know, seasoned and trained warriors coming to take everything, including you, and burn it to the ground. So yeah, you
Mm,
need a different level of protection, which is why I think you can definitely see a difference in fortification art, the demand for fortification engineering between
mm.
various regions of Europe. And like
Oh yeah.
Korea didn't need fortifications because for a long time, because Korea is a peninsula. So the access points are pretty limited. Either you're going to come by sea, and it's really hard to do a successful invasion by sea,
Mm,
especially in the first millennium, or you're coming through this tiny little bit of land that connects you to kind of what was the Middle Kingdom, what was China. So you don't have as many groups coming through and causing constant chaos. So Korea
mm.
never they developed palaces, but they were not fortifications, which means when people did successfully get in, it didn't go well.
Yeah.
Um,
I can
but
imagine
whereas
so.
Japan, it's like they were just tearing each other up left, right, and
Yeah.
center. So you have all of those castles. Well, there aren't so many that survived, but there used to be a lot
Mm,
more. So it's really interesting how what causes humans to innovate, um, and getting rid of the slave trade was actually probably good for Ireland and innovation and technology, because you can show throughout history, anytime you have a slave labor force, there's no need for innovation because you have people to do the work for you.
mm.
But the second you have a shortage of manpower, then suddenly you have to use your brain to get clever about things. So
That's very interesting that
yeah,
you would say that, because I think that would be a good argument to take, especially when we have then the sudden arrival of, as you were saying, the German stonemasons coming
right.
into Ireland. That you have the end of the slave trade, and then you have the arrival of the German stonemasons. So yeah, that could be a decent argument to make.
Yeah. And so if you wouldn't, if you start studying world history, the further back you go, you're like, oh, you're right. Like the Greeks had some of the most amazing inventors, but they kept making all these party robots because they
Mm,
didn't need machines to do actual work. They had a massive slave labor force. The
mm,
Romans were the same way. They did build some amazing engineering, but they had no reason to actually innovate machinery because they had slaves.
oh, that's true.
And then the problem comes when a plague comes along and kills 90% of your population, and then suddenly you're screwed.
Yeah, that's never good.
Oh, storage space, souterrain. Ninqui, let me spell that for you. So it's a French word actually, which is interesting. Why are archaeologists using the French word for the larder? Because the English word is actually larder for that underground cool space.
For souterrain, is it French?
Yeah, it's a French word.
Ah,
Yeah,
I
it's a
did
French.
not, because that's
That's
exactly the spelling. I'm not sure why they're using the
that's a
French
French
word.
word.
Yeah, I just, yeah, the linguistic side of my brain. And give me a second.
Yeah.
Give me a
You're
second. I'm going
welcome,
to use
Ninqui.
Google Translate because
Let me see.
I'm not a linguistic, so I don't
While you look
specialize
into
in
that,
the.
we have a comment. Toynbee, the historian, expressed the opinion that Ireland was developing its own offshoot of European civilization, but the Vikings and later the Normans, then later the English stopped that from happening. Oh, that is a complex argument, and I think we're not going to delve too deeply into that today. But reading the reading of history, you could definitely
Mm,
look at it
I
that
would
way.
100% definitely disagree with that, simply
Mm.
because if you look at,
This is
I'm not
actually live,
sure.
Seamus, just so you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally would definitely disagree with that. Because just before then, like at the very start of 410, and no, obviously I don't really specialize in history before 410. But the very start of 410, around 390, 410, Ireland is already heavily influenced by Roman finds. We can find plenty of Roman finds, and we're finding, because there's a load more roads being developed in Ireland, and that means you have to send in the archaeologists. And so with that, we're finding a load of Roman finds, and with that, it shows that there's a massive influence of Rome. So there is trade between Ireland and Rome is having an influence in Ireland. Now that is a Hiberno-Roman influence. So
Right.
the the Romans are trading, the Irish are taking it on, and they're making their own designs. And then by the time we get up to 550 with
Mm.
Diarmid Mac Kerbal, you've got more of an Eastern Roman influence coming into Ireland. So they're very much dressing like the Byzantine Empire, from my interpretation. And you could see that literally all over Ireland. There are type cross slabs, Ireland, early medieval cross slabs, and oh my God, it is insane how many cross slabs of every single design of the Eastern Roman Empire is found all over Ireland. You can find any type you want, from Egyptian style, from Constantinople style, every single type of cross that's within the Eastern Roman Empire, and then later on with the Charlemagne Empire, can be found in Ireland. It's like,
Right.
and people keep thinking it's Irish traders going over to the Byzantine Empire, seeing these crosses, and then coming back and basically telling a stonemason or somebody this is what it looks like, and then describing what they've seen. And they are found dotted all over Ireland. It's insane. So that shows, and that's around 550. So it shows that during the period of Diarmid Mac Kerbal, who himself was the last pagan king of Ireland, that he's heavily influenced by the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And then by the time,
I mean, my understanding of first millennium history in general for Europe, including Ireland, the way the trade forces move, the way religion moves, right? There's so much interconnectivity that I feel like viewing Ireland as an offshoot, kind of
yeah,
developing its own. I mean, each region developed its own culture, right? They developed their own language, they developed their own specificity, but I mean, they were still all very, influencing each other. There was a lot of back and forth.
mm,
So yeah, I'm not, and that kind of continues even when the Scandinavians are there, even when the Normans come. There's this tendency for them all to go native at some level,
mm,
right? Um, and then the Irish when they go abroad, like there's this great portrait of who was it, Piers Butler? Um,
yeah,
yeah, he's at Henry VIII's court, and Holbein does this great sketch watercolor of him, and he is
mm,
full on Henry VIII style. There is nothing Irish to be seen about him, right? So that
mm,
that that going native goes both ways. I mean,
yeah,
he's got a really red beard and red hair. Like he looks Irish, like he's definitely a redhead, but
mm,
his clothing is very, very high fashion Tudor court. So
mm.
yeah, I think it's more complicated than that. Than
It is massively complicated. Like, it does seem that you constantly have influences into Ireland, but then the Irish are making it of their own fashion. That's
yeah,
why you constantly have, like, Celtic Charlemagne style or Hiberno Scandinavian style, and then
Right.
eventually as the the Anglo-Normans come in, you've got more of
Mhm.
that French style coming back in again, which
Right.
eventually becomes the Anglo-Irish style by the time we get up to the 14th and 15th century. And
Yeah.
as you pointed out multiple times, that Anglo-Irish style, now obviously you can blatantly say it right now, is kind of more influenced by the Burgundies and the French, isn't it?
It does really seem to be following the Burgundian, the Franco-Burgundian fashions pretty heavily. The visuals we do have point that way. And what's
Yeah.
interesting about Ireland affecting, people, there's this forgotten bit of history, as there often is, that Ireland also impacted Europe. Like, it's not a one-way street. So the Irish, the brat, was so massively popular in mainland Europe from like the 13th century onward. We have records showing up in French inventories and expense accounts, Italian inventory expense accounts, English, German, that people are importing the woolly Irish brat, and
Hmm.
it's cropping up as a luxury item that people are craving for winter warmth, right?
Yeah.
So there's something special about the Irish cloak and the way it's made, the way it's processed. And I can absolutely see that, some guy in Avignon walking about town with his, kind of exotic looking woolly, fuzzy, cloak, and saying, yes, this has been imported from Ireland. And everyone goes, oh, wow, that's really far away. How cool is that?
Hmm.
So, it's not just a one-way street.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think sometimes historians are like doctors, specialists. They get so
Yeah.
focused on their little tiny area that they forget, like, that the kidney's actually connected to other organs.
Hmm.
And that to understand the kidney and its malfunction or its function, you have to understand how other organs work as well.
Yeah, and it's always about consulting other people as well. Like you've seen
Mm,
that multiple times.
yeah.
Language is definitely not my per se. And so I would definitely turn around to someone else and say, okay, so what's your interpretation of that particular word? Like you could see there with suzerain. I put it in there and I can't even pronounce the word. The word is way off there. And I couldn't, I just looked at it and went, oh, I'm going to ask, maybe I'll poke around, ask Yuki for the interpretation. I'll ask around and stuff. So it's definitely a thing of not only don't stay in your own bubble, go and
Yeah.
poke and prod and ask people, because oh my god, like even in the Irish medieval sphere, there's so many people looking down at others rather than
Yeah.
poke and prod and see what the crack is.
Well,
Um,
I will tell you that you coming to me all those months ago and saying, I want to understand about Italy because I've read about these guys, the Fitzgeralds who went to Italy
yeah.
and set up shop there. Let's talk. And that got me going, huh, what, what other connections might there be? And suddenly my medieval world is much more colorful and interesting than it was before that conversation, right?
Mm,
And
yeah, yeah,
your
big time.
medieval Irish world is now more interesting and multicultural than it was before that
Oh
conversation.
yeah, 100%. Now
Yeah.
it's a bog trotter dressed in all fancy silk.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, need to change
And
this guy to a silk fella.
so yeah, so we've got a couple of got to get Seamus, enjoy your work. I hope we can see you again. Mehdi, welcome. Thank you for joining us again. We are going to be going on a museum tour, by the way, Friday morning Korea time, Thursday evening America's time. And I wish I could get these. Oh, go away. I asked for some support earlier and they won't leave me alone. And they keep popping up. Um, let's see. I was going to ask if there were Irish influences going the other way. Yep, I'm glad we already got to there.
Mm,
And Caravaggio says, I see this transfer of culture almost as a tide coming and going, now this way and then the other. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. It's a give and take. And I feel like you definitely need to follow the tides to understand what is actually happening. Yeah.
mm.
Okay, well
Oh,
let's
100%.
let's take it back to our actual topic today, bog trotter. It's going to be your new favorite word,
Yeah.
Mehdi.
That's
Welcome.
me, like I'm a bog trotter. Bog trotter and proud.
Okay, so we're talking today specifically. We're going to be focusing on living in Ireland and Italy in these houses, in the similarities, these structures, which are shockingly similar,
Mm,
because everyone seems and it's interesting because the landscape, the living landscape of Italy is completely different from the living landscape of Ireland. Like Ireland has
mm.
some cities, but there's a lot of people living out there in the country. But Italy is very urbanized. The northern half of Italy is very urbanized. Southern Italy, different world.
Oops.
Yeah, Southern Italy, different world. The northern part of Italy is really urbanized, and so you have like here is San Gimignano. This is one of the cities that has survived in its basically medieval state unchanged. But this is how all Italian cities used to look, basically in the 14th century. This is what
Mm,
they looked like, with these skyscraper tower houses. And each one of those towers is a family's private home, right? So you had multiple tower houses in a city,
mm,
each of them very suspicious of the other and very defensively designed. In fact, usually the door to access these things was not anywhere near the ground level. You actually had to go up a set of stairs. Ah, wait, darn it. No, go back. You actually had to go up a set of stairs. You can see the door. That's the
mm.
door. That door, like 6 stories up, that's the entrance to one of the most famous extant tower houses in Bologna. This one is now leaning, and they've had to reinforce it so you can no longer go up inside of her. Um, but there used to be an external set of stairs that would lead up there. And in a time of trouble, you just kind of sawed them off and let them fall to the ground, and people couldn't get up to you.
Mm.
So it's a different kind of level of paranoia.
Yeah, it's very interesting that it solidly reminds me of the development of the Irish towers during the Viking Age. Do you remember those ones in the monastic settlements in
Right.
those
Yeah.
famous photos to do with the monks being attacked by Vikings, which, by the way, didn't happen between 793 to 820 when you have the early Viking attacks on monastic settlements. Those towers were actually built way in the 10th century when the monastic settlements were under the protection of the Vikings. So you wouldn't have had Vikings attacking monastic settlements. You would have had rival kind of clans
Right. Locals.
attacking
Local.
instead. Yeah, yeah.
Local attacks, not foreign attacks. Always better.
Yeah, yeah, which is interesting. Don't get me wrong, you had Vikings paid by other Vikings to attack monastic settlements and stuff. So the Viking Age isn't over completely. And we have examples of Vikings burning the bottom of it. But the reason why I bring it up is because in the Irish Tower, the what was it, the clergy one, which sadly I didn't give you a photo of because I didn't realize you were going to bring it, that kind of conversation would pop up. But in it, you can't go straight in. You actually have to go up a ladder into.
Mm,
There's a door, which is
right.
two door steps up, and then you have the door, and then that way the monks can run up and they pull up the ladder, and
Right.
then. Yeah, and that's not it. Like once you're in, then you have 2 floors, and there's a ladder going between one floor to the next, so they can pull the ladder up again. You say, and that's double defense. The
Right.
problem with those towers, though, is that there was no foundation under it. So a lot of them did collapse. And also, on top of that, raiders were fully aware of this as well. So they would burn the bottom of the tower house, which would cause it to collapse.
Right.
So the foundation wise in the development, because this
Ugh,
is still the 10th century, they just
right.
didn't understand that if you build something really high up, the foundation at the bottom has to be as good as it, when you build
Right.
up. Like,
Right. Yeah, that's yeah, the engineering on some of these things, these Italian ones is insane. It's I
mm,
mean, you know, wow. And the ones in Bologna, unfortunately, they're finding out that the engineering, even though they've lasted for 800 years almost at this 700 years at this point, they're finding out that well, but there have been earthquakes since then, believe it or not. The
mm,
Alps, there's actually 2 plates colliding into each other, right around that part of the world, tectonic plates. And so there's been earthquakes,
mm.
and they've actually these really tall ones like this in Bologna, they've had to emergency what on earth? Something just happened. I don't know. My messages just popped up. Anyway, they've had to figure out serious interventions to shore everything up and keep it from actually collapsing in the center of the university town of Bologna, which is hundreds of thousands of students live in this city, right, and walk by this tower every day. So,
Mm.
um, you know, it is shocking that they were actually able to last as long as they have.
Yeah, because that's the biggest fear in Japan right now is that they have to tear down a lot of these well-protected buildings, or they have to rebuild the entire foundation of them. Um, it is very, very interesting to very much study, and that's the reason why history and archaeology is so important, is
Mm,
because we can learn the development of how these building structures are put up and why we should protect these. as much as possible, because we can see, okay, so this is how we messed up here, this is how we can make it better, and be able to learn from it for defensive reasons, and
Right.
also to protect against the earth itself that's trying to kill us.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Mother Nature, she's not so motherly all the time.
Yeah.
So I wanted, because I actually have a very specific example of a tower house in Florence that is still mostly in its 14th and 15th century state. So, and
Mm,
I've been inside of it a lot, so I have lots of great indoor footage. So I really wanted to delve into the living, like what it was like to live in these things, what the various rooms were used for, and sort of compare that with how the various spaces and rooms and facilities were used in a 15th century Irish tower house. So from my perspective, I'm going to be talking mostly about the Palazzo Davanzati, which is the one depicted here on the right. And then for your part, we have that fantastic diagram that shows all the layers, like a layer cake. And then we've got several exterior examples to kind of help give the example. So first off, the exterior. So the Palazzo Davanzati, you can see there's definite visual similarities. Massive stone building, um, you know, the windows. If you'll notice, there's like a big gap between where the windows actually start and the ground floor. You don't want to put your windows right on the ground floor, because these things, yes, they're residential, but they're defensive, right?
mm,
Um, what has been changed on the Palazzo Davanzati, just looking at the facade, that was updated in the 16th century when it was modernized a little bit. There used to be defensive crenellations up here. And there are actually other palazzi in Florence and other places in Italy that still have their medieval crenellations, because you would obviously put soldiers up there with weapons and boiling oil and all the things, with munitions, there's not much evidence of guns in Florence until like the end of the 15th century, but archers and whatnot at the top there. So if anyone tried to come and take your stuff, you could defend yourself. But in the early 16th century, the crenellations were replaced by what looks like that beautiful rooftop terrace up there, which is kind of a sign that maybe things are getting less dangerous in Florence. When you replace your defensive crenellations with luxury outdoor living space, it's a sign that things are maybe not as awful as they once were, or as scary as they once were.
mm.
Um, yeah.
It's interesting that you said that they're using a lot of. It's not until the end of the 15th century that we start to see the development of guns with castles, because it's the same thing in Ireland as well. It's not until we get to the Wars of the Roses in Ireland that we start to see cannons being used in Waterford and stuff with the defenses there. So that's quite interesting that they're still relying in the early 15th century, when we assume guns came in and then just kind of dominated the whole scene, and the knight just falls on the floor and he dies. That's
Right.
not the case, because Ireland seems to be the same as well, where handguns are more used for ambush purposes of suddenly scaring everybody, rather than accurate shots. That the gun isn't suddenly appears and then dominates the battlefield. It seems to be used for more terrifying purposes,
Right. I
rather
mean,
than
the explosive sound. So the chroniclers at the time in Europe, in around Italy and France, and in the Hundred Years' War, they talk about the
mm,
terrifying cacophony, like literally terrifying, like striking
yeah,
terror into your hearts. The terrifying cacophony of of the firearms. They weren't very effective at hitting a
yeah,
target. They weren't very effective at really blowing things up yet. But the effect was absolutely more psychological. And in cities like Italy, it's not an effective weapon, right? They're
yeah,
like, you
yeah,
look at these cramped streets. Um, Unfortunately, I didn't think to include some of my imagery of cramped streets. It's just not an effective weapon, and it's not going to do anything
yeah.
against structures like this. We're not. It's like the second half of the 15th century, from when I understand, that cannons really start to get
Yeah.
developed in any kind of real
Um,
way.
because Lionel, and the reason why I highlight this as well is because there's two sieges that happen. Well, not Dublin, not really a siege, but there's a siege of Carrickfergus, right? And Lionel of Antwerp in around 1370 allegedly puts guns up in Carrickfergus, but they're never used through the siege. There's no, like, because you think if someone's going to use cannons in 1370, be all over the literature, like, oh my God, use cannons. But there's no mention of it whatsoever. So it
Right.
seems like the cannons were just, oh God, this wasn't going to do the job. So they kind of just left it in the back. And even when the O'Neills capture Carrickfergus, there's no sign of them using the cannons. Maybe they just looked at it and went, what's this useless creature?
Right.
But we do know that when, what was his name, Art MacMore Cavanagh and the likes of the Butlers go into Dublin and capture Dublin and take the cannons from Richard II. Richard II had left cannons in Dublin. They weren't used again. They were never used in the defences of Dublin until we get up to the late period of the Wars of the Roses in Ireland. Then we see in the likes of the Siege of Waterford and stuff, cannons being used. So it's interesting that cannons don't seem to be used for any defensive reasons, both in Italy and Ireland, until we get up into the period of the 16th
I mean,
century.
I would definitely not lump all of Italy into that, but Florence, like an urban
Okay.
environment like Florence, it's not your effective choice yet.
Mm.
There's no way, yeah. And God, to haul cannon to the top of one of these towers. Could you imagine that? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that's also a good point.
Oh my freaking God. No, thank you.
Yeah,
Everyone,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
everyone just said, let's not do that. It was like this
Well, there
gentleman's
you go.
agreement. We're just not going to use this in the cities. It's no, just no.
Yeah. And
Um,
then I remember I was asking the Knightly Lady actually when I was doing an interview with her about cannons and stuff. And the other big problem with cannons as well is trying to get them to point downwards because most
mm,
of the cannons can only fire
right,
straight. So trying to level it in such a way where they can, hit the target is actually a complete science in itself. So the majority of the times, the Knightly Lady believes that in Ireland, the siege is there. Most likely, the reason why the cannons, although they're present by Lionel of Antwerp and then Richard II, is that when they did arrive in Ireland, the engineers didn't know how to line up with the target and were just like, oh, this is useless, chuck it to the side.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that no matter whether it's firepower, whether it's powered chemically or mechanically,
Mm.
projectile weapons. That's the word I'm looking for. Projectile weapons have always had like real seriously professional engineers to operate
Mm.
them, right? It's
Yeah.
not just a question of point and click. I mean, obviously modern handguns are different, but especially the earlier you go, it's not a question of point and click. If you don't know how to handle the gunpowder, if it gets damp, if you don't understand how to set the fuse, if you don't understand the trajectory and the angles, if you don't understand your quantities, it's not like it is now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And the comment section is listing out all the main problems that they definitely faced in the
yep,
late
yep,
14th century, early
exactly.
15th century, until the Fitzgeralds are able to get that trade route
Yep,
from Ireland into the likes of, as we said
yep,
before, Florence, the Iberian Peninsula, and able to get all that stuff. As you guys are pointing out in the comment section, the likes of dry powder, engineers that know how to point it correctly, all that stuff really does add up. Like, so very good points in the comment section. Like,
yep. I was about to say that. Yep. Thank you, dear fellow viewers and fellow travelers on this adventure. Okay,
mm,
but I'd like to focus less on the warlike aspect and more on like what it was like to live in these spaces. Um,
awesome.
right. So, wow, these aren't tower houses, Philip. These are like
Well,
gorgeous
that's a good.
complexes with massive
That's that's
bailey.
that's a very good example of a castle down in Leinster, which is the southeast of the island. So around the southeast of the island, Butler territory or the Macmorrough territory, where you get more of the Anglo-Irish influences inside those areas. Those castles are more made for conventional style warfare. The classic sieges and stuff. And so
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you look
yeah.
at this castle, it looks more. And there's actually what's so interesting and amazing about Clare Castle is the fact that we can find influences from the Crusaders. So there's actually murder holes and oh my god, if I can pronounce it properly now, the where they would drop with the box and they drop down all the stones and stuff, all that kind of technology and stuff, you can actually find very similar in the Middle East. So Clare Castle is an amazing example of an Irish conventional style castle that you see with influences all the way from the Middle East, which is no surprise given that the Anglo-Irish that were around those areas would have served with the likes of the Knights Hospitaller and stuff. So that's why Kerr Castle is a very good example of a more conventional style warfare castle. Not really what you're after, Rachel, right now.
Yeah. So actually, you talked about murder holes. So Italian city palazzi had murder holes. Let me show you some murder holes. So the Palazzo d'Avanzati has 4. Here I am, and they're still there. They're still in the floor. Here they are. You can actually, they let me lift the wooden cover off. They've put glass and bars in place so people don't accidentally fall through anymore. But
Yeah.
these are in fact murder
Anymore.
holes. Yeah, exactly. These are murder holes, and they absolutely use them for their purpose. And they are found in this beautiful great hall that you see up here in the upper right. Like that beautiful, elegant space. I mean, look how refined, the beautiful woodwork, all the gorgeous furnishings, beautiful terracotta tile floor. But there are 4, count them, 4 murder holes. So, this super refined space that ideally is meant for hosting fine guests and holding banquets and, family celebrations, but also you can kill some people if you want to.
Yeah, you can see that with Scotland and Ireland as well, especially with the tower houses are built for ambushing and stuff, which is completely taboo. Definitely something you shouldn't do. But yeah, inviting guests in does happen within Irish and Scottish history as well.
So so let's talk about the domestic situation. So in the Palazzo d'Avanzati, it's a tower house. So we're going to start on the ground floor. So this is actually the ground floor as it looks today. It looked like this structurally in the Middle Ages, but obviously there's like displays in display cases now that there wouldn't have been there. We're now on the ground floor, and I'm wondering what the purpose of tower houses, the ground floor of tower houses in Ireland was. So here you can see these 3 doors, what look like doors on the bottom of the Palazzo d'Avanzati. That space, that giant space down there is actually probably like 20, 25 feet high. It's really high. The picture completely makes it look like this thing is short. She's not short. She's like 7 or 8 stories tall by modern standards. And that space down below is called the loggia. And the loggia was actually open in the Middle Ages. So those doors, they weren't there. It was just open to the street. It was the family's public space where they would receive clients, where they would hold banquets and feasts, and they would hold dancing. And those were generally the functions that were open to the public, or that they wanted the public to see. Because of course, in most of Europe, it's about being seen and demonstrating your power in some kind of very visible way. And in Italian city-states, the loggia is how they did it. Now that got closed up by the end of the 15th century. In the case of the Palazzo d'Avanzati specifically, apparently there were wool shops that had rented space in the loggia. So it had closed up, and that public function had moved away and been moved upstairs to a more private kind of function. But yeah, so did the ground floor of these Irish tower houses, let me see if I can get to that diagram. That's so cool. What were they used for?
So remember we were having that
Yeah, here we go.
conversation about coming to the end of the 100 Years' War.
Right.
You had pretty much all war bands that were coming back from fighting France. They had made a return. A lot of them became bandit war bands and stuff. Well,
Right.
the likes of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, they were trying to clean a lot of that up. So they had modernized their laws, not just to clean up basically the countryside, which had all these wandering bandits wandering around the place, but
Right.
also to update their laws to match what was happening over in Germany and Italy with their mercenary company laws and stuff. And so what they brought in was a law called coin and livery, right?
Right.
Livery being, I think livery is a play on words on, what was it called? Levy, right? And
No,
so,
livery is actually from the French word livrer, to deliver, and it's
oh,
anything that a nobleman or woman would give to their servants, their retainers, as a form of payment. It usually was clothing of some kind.
oh,
Yeah, it was usually
that,
clothing.
which,
It was not
yeah,
necessarily heraldic, but it could be. But it was usually the
okay.
annual delivery of clothing that was part of their remuneration package as a servant.
which did add up because it was expected that the Fitzgeralds, Butlers, and also the O'Briens, who were part of this as well, would arm them with all of their kit.
Yep,
And, you know,
exactly.
wanted to have the fanciest looking. And that's why they ended up, you had Kerns who even came from the common areas and stuff, because Ireland doesn't have peasants, it's got commoners instead. And they would have, you know, the classic saffron tunic and stuff. And it would be crazy for your Kern or Gallowglass not to have a saffron tunic, because, you know, it was a real status. And so a lot of that would have been provided from the likes of the Fitzgeralds, the O'Briens, and the Butlers, right? Would have
Right.
given that to them, right? So anyway, getting back to my main point, you had coin and livery, which became a main part and a main staple between the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds. And the O'Neills would catch on with that as well, with their mercenary laws, their what's the word? I've got the spelling in my bloody head now. And God, Bonachta laws. They would update their Bonachta laws as well. And basically, what these laws all meant was that now they had to basically look after their own retinue, right? And so
Right.
at the very bottom, that's where, and you can actually
Oh.
see on the first floor and the second floor, you can see multiple beds and stuff. And that's all for the retinue. They're basically the mercenaries that they had to look after and take over. So they had both mercenary companies for seasonal fighting between the period of May all the way over to what was it called? Halloween, which is November. So from
Right.
May all the way to November, you would have had the mercenary companies that would have came all the way from Scotland. If they're coming from Scotland, they're referred to as Red Shanks, right?
Right.
So you would have had Red Shanks that would have came in here. The difference between the Red Shanks now is that they would have had a bigger cloak that would have been tartan. And that would have, which eventually becomes the kilt, allegedly, right?
Right.
Um,
As they belt it
they
and
would
start doing things to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why they have a bigger cloak is because they would be out in the wilderness much more longer, so they had to be able to do more stuff with their cloak than the
Right.
regular Gallowglass and Kern, right? So anyway, back to my main point. So you would have had all the mercenary companies come in, and you would have also had the retinue, which would have been there all season long, right? And they
Right.
had to be camped in the bottom, the first two floors there, as you can see there.
Ah,
Um,
right. Yeah, you can see
yeah,
the billets. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, and that's clever because, you know, they're on the first floors. So if someone gets in, they're in the way.
Yeah, from the get-go, that's exactly what's going on there, is that they are generally the first line of defense. And as you were saying before, at the very start, they would have had at the door, it would have been proper thick, proper built up, but they would have also had little slits as well to put the crossbows, the arrows,
Right.
and
So you get
also
your
later on it becomes the gun holes. They put the guns inside there. So
yeah, there's
when people
the little
finally,
the keyhole. If you see those windows that are keyhole shaped, that was an arrow
mm,
slit that got modified to a gun port at some point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that whole entrance there, that's the very well. I wouldn't say it's the last defense, but it's the last defense as you break into the keep itself. Because beforehand, obviously, around as we call it in Ireland, is the Dun, which is DU Fada N, which is a play on words of cattle. So there's a huge debate if the walls were used to hold cattle or not.
Ah,
Um,
right.
so you would have had obviously you can obviously correct me on this one. It's the skirt, isn't it? The skirt that goes around the keep itself,
Yeah,
the
the
main
skirt.
wall
Yeah.
itself.
The
So
the or
once you
the or
break
the belly.
into
Yeah.
so once you break into the walls itself, you would eventually make yourself over to the doors of the keep. Yeah, that's a very
Right.
good example,
Yeah,
actually.
there we go.
That's the Minute. That's the Fitzgeralds. That's actually the capital for the Fitzgeralds up in Kildare. And also on top of that, that's where the Irish Parliament was held. So it was either held here or it was held over in Kilkenny Castle. The reason why I don't have Kilkenny Castle up today is because Kilkenny Castle today is a modern castle, and
Right.
modern castles are completely different to
Completely
castles of the
different. Yeah.
15th century.
Yeah, a lot of especially people who don't live in Europe and even people who do or just aren't aware, a lot of people don't realize that these castles get modified. They get updated.
Yeah.
People live in them for hundreds of years and just like we today will update our kitchen after only 5 years of living, after a couple of hundred years people go, "Yeah, maybe we can do better." And And so your average castle in Europe is not even a little bit medieval anymore. Most of them have been completely gutted and redone, or they were burnt down and redone. So it's actually hard to find genuine medieval living spaces anymore, at least in Western Europe. It's easier in Eastern Europe for reasons. Yeah, so here's the cross section. So by comparison, this is a cross section of the Palazzo Davanzati. And it's called that because of the family, the Davanzati, who were the second owners, actually. The Davizi were the first. But you can still see that, just like at the Irish Tower House, you've got these floors, which they're not really huge. It's like, I don't know, 40, 50 feet from side to side, maybe 60 feet from end to end, going across. So it's definitely not the big palazzi of the Renaissance, which take on a more like ancient, Roman grand villa style. So we're still dealing with the tower mentality in the Palazzo Davanzati. And what's interesting about the Davanzati home is that they actually took two towers, two older medieval tower houses, and they knocked a wall out, right? Just like modern people do. And you can actually see that sort of. It's a little washed in this, but the front half is one old tower house and the back half is a different tower house, and there's actually a different color in stone between the two. And they literally just knocked the walls out so that they could make it a bigger tower house. So the outsides of Italian tower houses and Italian palazzi in general were actually also considered usable space. So if you look here along the Palazzo Davanzati, you can see these bars going across like every level. There are these wooden bars and all these rings and these chains, and you can see it here in profile. So you see this wooden bar. It looks like a ballet bar almost, except it's like 4 stories up, so you shouldn't do ballet there. Those bars and these rings, they would actually suspend birds in cages, monkeys on chains, and put them out for display in the daytime, so that you could basically an exterior menagerie. I mean, how weird is that?
Oh, so it's not like Ireland where we kind of let them off free. Because do you remember, I don't know if it was you I was saying it to or someone else, about the monkey up in Maynooth Castle that we were just looking at, that went and robbed one of the baby Fitzgeralds and brought him onto the roof and stuff. So yeah, it gives a good indication that the Irish just were given these gifts and just like, yep, go off free there now and have a walk for yourself.
No, when you got a pet monkey as a gift in Florence, you put it in a cage and you set it out, probably with a nice gold collar, or maybe even a little cute farsetto or something, right? So everyone could see your cool exotic pet. Yeah. And they would also use these to hang fabric. So the city during festival time everyone would decorate the outside of their palazzo. Can you imagine? Like, we use like Christmas lights and fake tinsel, but they would put silk and tapestries and drape them from those bars all down the front, so that the entire city became this amazing panoply of color. So yeah, and also they would put their laundry to dry. So, it went from super rich display of wealth to here's our underwear drying in the sun.
Yeah. You have to absolutely love it as well, because we could see that, bloody hell, her name has gone on my head, but I can easily go back to Maynooth Castle as well, where it was used for the Irish Parliament, and it wasn't just used for the Irish Parliament. So you had people who lived there that obviously, as you said there, would have hung up their underwear and stuff. Then the next minute it's been
Right.
used for the Irish Parliament. So all the officials of Ireland are going to it. And then suddenly it's used for assembly points, where then they have to bring in all the local people and agree how they're going to govern the local area. And also, because it's an assembly, you would have had the festival side of it, which is, the games, and also trying to get people married off and stuff inside of Maynooth Hall and stuff. And then you would have had a great feast as well, where they're bringing guests over from Europe and stuff. So you're right. Like, the multi-usage of castles is absolutely amazing. Like,
Yeah, they're like the Swiss Army knife of architecture in the Middle Ages, right? It's the ultimate multi-purpose space. Question: Did the Italian Maynooth? I don't want to. Is that the way to pronounce it?
Maynooth, Maynooth Castle.
Maynooth has an elevated door and an interior well. Did the Italians also have a way to secure the water supply? Why, thank you for asking, Mircala. It's like you just know my mind. So actually, Not all of the medieval palazzi in Florence, anyway. Come on, work with me here. Actually had I've dropped my laptop too many times. This poor thing. Not
Oh
all
no.
of them had an interior supply, but the Palazzo Davanzati is one of the early adopters of an interior supply. So this window-looking thing here, this is actually on the inside. This is the first floor Great Hall, and that is a well that runs through every single floor of the palazzo, from the kitchens, which are on the very top, all the way to its own private well in the basement. And so you could actually haul water up to every floor using a nice, easy to use pulley. You didn't have to carry it in buckets up the stairs. So basically, this palace was supplied with its own, or this mansion was supplied with its own water supply. So yes, they did. They started securing their own water supplies probably in the 13th or 14th century. But a lot of towns still had the situation where you had to go to a well and haul water back. So obviously, just like with the Romans, where the wealthy Romans, and not just in Rome, like all across the empire, including, by the way, Britain, the wealthy Romans had piped water that was piped into their homes, but the less well-to-do had to go and get it from the common water supply. Same idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did Irish tower houses also have an interior water supply like that, where you could, cleverly haul it up through your water pulley system, or
I was
were they
actually
working with
unaware of the one
cisterns,
for,
or
yeah. I was actually unaware of the one in Manu Castle, to be quite honest with you. But it makes sense because some of these castles are good siege for a good while, to be quite honest with you.
right,
So it makes sense, because what happens then, as we're entering into, it's not so bad at the very start, because most of these tower houses at the start of the 15th century is used for cattle raidings. The
right,
enemy comes and the blah blah blah. Then when we go into the Wars of the Roses, then we're having more conventional fighting around the Leinster area. So we have Castle, which isn't really a tower house per se, right? So
right,
the traditional Irish tower houses are more in the northwest of the island, which is more developed for cattle raiding. However, as we're then entering into the 16th century, these tower houses have to be used for conventional warfare. So the usage of water makes sense, because they have to survive these long sieges against the Tudors.
right.
So it does make sense that Maynooth Castle right away is in the area of conventional warfare, because that's up and erected around the 15th, from my knowledge anyway, for the 15th century, to deal with the end of the 100 Years' War, when you have the likes of the Talbot Butler feud. Then you're going into the Wars of the Roses in Ireland with the likes of Piltown and stuff like that. And then we're going into the Tudor conquest of Ireland, where straight away the Tudor conquest of Ireland starts with a siege of Maynooth Castle. So it makes sense that that stuff
Right,
exists.
that
Like,
you need that protected water supply. Yeah, I think in especially in places like Florence, sieges weren't really you didn't go and lay siege to your neighbor's tower house so much.
yeah,
There's just isn't the room for that, but certainly
but
you want to have your own water supply, because the public water supply can get corrupted, and you don't want
mm,
to, if you do get trapped in your home, you definitely do want to have that, because it could, and it did happen. Florence was like, basically went through a period of about 100 years of civil war.
yeah,
So yeah,
but
probably yeah,
oh yeah, I 100% agree. But the response makes perfect sense as well. Is that Maynooth Castle is one of the few castles that have it, because that whole Leinster area, which is in the southeast of the island, has a lot of conventional fighting going on. As I said earlier, Waterford has cannons coming into the Wars of the Roses in Ireland. So they're constantly, it's traditional old school sieging that's happening
right,
the majority of the time in the Leinster area. And
right.
it's also why we have such a huge, as we said, I know that Rachel will quickly sweep this term off its feet, which is Anglo-Irish, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
we use the term Anglo-Irish in the Leinster area, but it's way more complicated than that,
yeah.
because as I point out there, we have structural designs, conventional structural designs in Castle that comes from the Middle East, that comes in from the Knights Hospitallers. And on top of that as well, we have French words coming in. One of the most famous ones is the introduction of the, forgotten, the forgotten dungeon where you chuck them in, oubliette.
Oubliette.
Yeah, we have the likes of oubliettes that appear in tower houses and stuff, um, which highlights a huge French influence. As Rachel points out again and again and again, we're having huge Burgundy French influences coming into Leinster area, and that affects the castle structures as well,
Right.
especially with the Hundred Years' War and stuff. Because this is during the Hundred Years' War, we also have Art MacMor Cavanagh and the Gaelic resurgence, and he is using his Gaelic army to siege castles. He's not
Right.
just outside harassing and stuff. He is sieging castles and taking them.
Right.
So we have, it makes sense to me that Maynooth Castle is used for traditional sieging, and it was designed from the get-go for siege fighting, compared to the northwest of the island, where the castles are built more for cattle raiding.
Right.
Have
Right.
I
So we
ranted
have
on enough
a
about that?
we have a couple of funny comments. Need a video on Castle Monkey shenanigans? Yes, we
Mm.
totally do. Let me see. Caravaggio says the hearth and the water well, and I'm not certain I'm sorry. Sometimes the comments come through a little delayed. So Caravaggio, if you could just elucidate a little more on that, that'd be great.
Is that the
Um,
water wells inside the castle itself? Because
yeah, yeah.
there would be
But
a
I'm not
water
certain.
well.
Yeah, but the hearth question, the hearth and the water well.
Uh,
So hearths are actually depends on what you mean by hearth. So everyone should understand that fireplaces, like we understand them modernly, are a medieval innovation, and they are not adopted any instantly. They kind of started in Italy, and then the chimney with an actual fireplace with a chimney, that's not something that's throughout Europe. Most places in medieval Europe have a hearth in the center of the floor, and there's a hole in the ceiling, and the smoke just kind of sort of goes out, but for the most part, your entire space is smoky. So it's actually places, Italy is where chimneys and fireplaces, as we understand them, are invented. Um,
huh.
yeah. So, and they don't start making their way north of the Alps until like the end of the 14th, early 15th century.
Yeah.
And so there's this massive renovation of castles that happens throughout Europe in the 15th century to adopt this brand new technology, which really improves the quality of life. But the average home doesn't have them yet, right?
Mm.
So, it's unlikely that Maynooth, any hearths or chimneys are probably possibly even a post-medieval addition. Yeah,
Because
so
I know
that's
the yeah, because most of these tower houses are made around the 15th century, we do find the majority of the chimneys with the Italian, as you were saying there, the Italian style that comes in. But it'd be interesting next time I look at Trim Castle, which is an early Norman castle, where the heart is in the castle.
yeah.
Because now I'm assuming it's in the center.
But so most castles that have been lived in in the modern era have had them added. And
Yeah.
you have to actually talk to an architecture expert to figure out when they were added, because they're
Mm.
added in such a way that it's not necessarily obvious, like they're integrated into the space. So it's not like they come with a plaque that says added in 1422, right? You kind of have to
Yeah.
talk to the experts to know, because just because they have them now doesn't mean they had them in the 15th century. I guess that's
Yeah.
my point. Yeah, exactly. Braziers. Braziers were a thing in smaller rooms. You had braziers in the larger spaces. You had a hearth in the middle of the floor, and the smoke just kind of escaped, mostly, sort of, somewhat out the hole in the top. But there's a reason that people probably were generally suffering from a lot of pulmonary issues in medieval Europe,
Mm.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Let me see. Both are necessary for survival, and daily life revolves around them both. Oh yeah. So yeah, but the water well, exactly. There should be a hearth, but remember, a medieval hearth can be just a fireplace in the center of your floor, like in a Viking longhouse. Same
Yeah.
idea, just a different shape of space. Okay, so in the Palazzo Davanzati, once you walk, the loggia is kind of the public-facing part, that front area. There's a gate actually that separates the loggia from the interior courtyard. In the Palazzo Davanzati, this is the interior courtyard, and this kind of gives you an idea of the gap between the ground floor and the first floor. Like, you can see me, there's Contessa for scale, and you can see the size of those columns. This is me walking around the space in my 15th century Italian attire. And yeah, this interior courtyard is absolutely massive, and it was also used for festivities and for banquets. If they needed to extend the space of the loggia, or if they wanted to have something private, then they could close the gate on the loggia. But also, they could completely, they could completely cut that off, because these are the stairs coming up from that ground floor courtyard. And everyone always asks me, well, what's it like to walk upstairs with lots of dresses? Well, this is what it looks like. You have all of your skirts in your hand, and we tried to include video, but unfortunately, the streaming software used doesn't support embedded videos. Hopefully soon. Anyway, so you can
hopefully.
see that you can't be carrying anything else if you're dealing with your skirts and you're going up these stairs. What's interesting about the Palazzo d'Avanzato in its 14th century state is the stairs on the lower floors are actually stone. Which that falls in with what you said earlier, Philip, about the monks not figuring out that the bottom floor has to be sturdier than the top floor. Well, the Italians figured it out, that you can't. The lower floors have to be made of heavier duty, more sturdy materials than the upper floors. So in the Palazzo d'Avanzato, the first couple of staircases are stone, and then the upper ones become wood. Yeah. In this great hall that you have up here, this is on the first floor. And as I said, once they closed the loggia up in the second half of the 15th century, that really became the main space for partying and also pouring boiling oil on your enemies if they should try to get in. But in this hall, so you look at this hall and it looks pretty plain, right? Like the walls are kind of plain. They're écru, or whatever strange eggshell or whatever designer color we would call that these days. But that's because they weren't meant to be bare like that. There are actually all these little dots that go along the upper part of the upper picture. Those are actually iron hooks that are permanently embedded in the wall all the way around. And these are tapestry hooks. And almost all spaces in medieval Europe, all rich people's spaces had these, whether it was merchants' homes or castles' homes. They had these iron hooks, and you could hang all kinds of tapestries and wall hangings from them to both insulate your space against foul weather and also to beautify it. And then you could also easily change up the look, because you can pick this tapestry for one day and then another tapestry for another season if you want, versus wall painting. So even though this space now looks kind of drab and colorless, and this is true of pretty much most castles in Europe, you need to understand that they would diaper the entire thing in beautiful fabric, whether it was silk wall hangings with heraldic embroideries all over them, or it was tapestries like these, right? So what kind of, what do you know anything about the decorations that would go into an Irish tower house to make it not be depressing and bland?
Yeah, tapestries is definitely one that's a huge argument. I remember I was on the project, I was actually showing you this one, that mod or video game for the Wars of the Roses in Ireland. And we were debating and arguing about the kind of tapestry that would be on the walls of Ireland, because sadly, all the tapestry, except for in Kilkenny Castle, all of it has gone completely missing. So other than the tapestry that we can see in Burnratty Castle and also over in Kilkenny Castle, the majority of tapestry has gone completely missing.
Right.
But it does give us a good idea that the tapestry would have covered the walls in a kind of, as we refer to it, as a kind of, I remember back in the day, referred to it as a Celtic style tapestry. But
right.
yeah, exactly. But more kind of, I don't know what academics are referring to these days, because I remember just back in the day they referred to it as the Celtic style tapestries and stuff.
Right.
But we don't really have a good idea of what they would have looked like and stuff on the walls. I am aware of the tapestry that's in Burnratty Castle. So Burnratty Castle, which is a big, absolutely magnificent castle that's owned by the O'Briens. And if you go into their, what was it called? The Great Hall that's in there, you'll see the tapestry still up there today in Burnratty Castle, which gives you a good idea. And that would have been the floor of the Great Hall would have been there just for the assemblies and the great feasts of the high nobility. So that's Burnratty Castle today, which is owned by the O'Briens. The O'Briens, who are still standing today, their dynasty still lives in Ireland today. and they're still recognized. Funny enough, by the Queen of England, they're recognized as the rightful kings of Ireland,
Oh,
and
great.
they're
Okay.
still, yeah. So if Ireland decided to want to become a monarchy tomorrow, they would at least have the backing of the Queen. What was it? The Queen of England, allegedly, if she wasn't trying to take it herself. But what's it called?
So there,
What
there
the
were there were
tapestries?
there were tapestries, extant ones or ones they just know about.
From what I think, I can't remember if they're surviving inside of Burnet Castle. They have tapestries in there today, and I can't remember if they're actually dated to the period of the 15th century, or if they're later additions from around
Right.
the Victorian era. But there was, if you go inside there, they will explain straight away that there was tapestry in the walls of the castle, Burnet Castle, and they would have been mostly for the assemblies of the more noble classes, and also for great feasts when the likes of the Fitzgeralds and also guests from Europe would have came over and feasted with the O'Briens. That they would have gone into the Great Hall, the middle, much more of the higher floors of the Great Hall, and seen all this tapestry work around it with their great
Right.
table. And then on top of that, which makes it really impressive, is they found, the O'Briens managed to find a thing called a great deer. I think it's called the great deer, but it's a giant deer. It's absolutely humongous, and it was extinct by the time it's extinct by the time you get into the likes of the Neolithic and the megalithic and stuff.
Right. One
But
of
the
the megafauna
O'Briens,
from that era. Yeah.
yeah, but the O'Briens managed to find it in a bog, and they pulled it out of the bog, and then they hung it up. The skeleton of it, they hung up in the Great Hall
Of
itself.
course they did.
And so when you come into the Great Hall, you see this giant, insanely impressive skull of this great deer that's absolutely huge in the center of it. It's like the skull of a dragon or something. It's
Right.
absolutely magnificent. And any visitor coming in, especially from the 15th century, must have been like, oh my God, no wonder they were writing off Ireland as a majestic island with these giant deers running about.
Right. Like the fun mythology that could spring up around a skeleton like that, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. Let's go to the comments. I wonder, oh, yeah, I was going to ask about tapestries. So I just want to clarify for everyone, tapestry is actually a weave. It has nothing to do with wall hanging.
Yeah.
This is a tapestry because it is woven, right? Wall hangings can be anything that you hang on a wall. They can be tapestry. Rugs can be used as wall hangings. Um, silk or fabric that has been appliqued or painted, that's a wall hanging. But tapestry it's a specific weave. And so honestly, the only places where tapestries were really being woven, there are specifically tapestry making centers in Europe because the technology required for it is actually pretty advanced. So it's a question of, are they really talking about tapestries or do they just mean wall hangings? Because actually the Norse had their own, and in Scandinavia going up until the 15th century, maybe in the 16th century, they had their own really fascinating style of creating wall hangings, this intarsia effect, where they'll actually cut out a shape in a bunch of different squares, and they'll swap the shapes in the same color, like the exact same shape, but in alternating colors. And they'll swap, say, black and white, so that this one is black and white, this one is white and black. And then they'll stitch those squares together to make this amazing inlaid fabric wall hanging, basically. So yeah, so I wonder if anyone has actually really thought about or found records, because usually it's in the documentary evidence when you don't have the original thing, to figure out if it's actually a tapestry or if it's some other kind of wall hanging.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'll have to bug and prod next time I'm home, because it's actually my living history group, the White Horse Vikings, and also the Boer Company, which covers more of the late medieval history, that actually have a close connection with the Burnet Castle. So I can definitely poke and prod them anyway to find out what the story is with the O'Briens and their alleged tapestries up in their place.
So I wonder if the regular folk used weaved thatch in the same way in winter. When you say regular folk, weaved thatch in the same way as what? You mean as they do in the summer, or as other people wove thatch? So I've lived and traveled across the world and seen how different cultures actually handle thatched roofs, because we have in Korea, they've been doing thatched roofs for millennia, just like they have in Europe. And the process more or less seems to be pretty much the same. It doesn't. That what differs is like some people cut shapes into certain layers of the thatch, and some cultures don't. But it all mostly seems to kind of go the same way, from my experience. So if you could just clarify, Mehdi, a little bit what you mean by you wonder if regular folk used weave thatch in the same way in winter, in the same way as what, I guess, is the clarification I'll need. Mirkala says, there are tapestries in the inventories of the Kildare Fitzgeralds from the 16th century, but I don't think they're extant. Yeah. Unfortunately, Ireland, the only reason Ireland has extant anything is when stuff ends up in anaerobic mud. So,
yeah, sadly.
or it ends up charred and therefore carbonized and kind of preserved like petrified fabric. Let me see. If you consider any titles that come from surrender and regrant as legit. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a comment too.
God, no, you're a funny one.
Yeah, we're not wandering. No, back to living in the 15th century. For wall hanging inside to retain heat, ma'am. Oh, right. I see what you're saying. Well, I'm assuming so that's a good question. Do you know how your tower houses were roofed in the Middle Ages? Were they tiled? Were they thatched? In Italy, they're tiled. It's all terracotta, baby.
Well, we do have, for the most part, I remember this was covered with the O'Neills, that they were being thatched at the top, right? But then the Irish found out that the Tudors, as part of, as you were saying there, with the surrender and regrant and all that kind of stuff, the Irish found out if you applied for lead roofs, they could send over the lead, and you could use the lead then to melt it down and use for cannon bullets.
Right.
So the Irish all applied for, as always, what was it called? As a part of the surrender and regrant, applied for lead roofs, melted down, and used it for ammunition against the English.
Right. So then they weren't using the lead for tiles and roofing, which means they were probably thatching them.
Oh yeah, they went back to thatching. Yeah.
That's hysterical, but also that's extra flammable. So that's maybe not the best plan, guys.
Yeah. Later on, when the English are sieging us again, yeah. But yeah, we do know that the tower houses were being thatched. But we still have lead houses. I think a few of them. I think this one here, for the example, is lead, if I'm not mistaken. Like,
it looks leadish. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't look thatchy.
Yeah. So there were definitely people that did accept it to lead their roofs and stuff, but there were definitely grants. Maybe there were even like imaginary castles that needed lead and stuff,
right,
to be used for ammunition.
That's like the story of Hrolf the Ganger being converted by to accept the Duchy of Normandy, right?
Yeah.
And part of their baptism was getting a brand new tunic, and so his men were going and getting baptized multiple times so that they could get as many new tunics as possible. That seems right on par. So Ocean Answer, we're right just now we were talking about the tower houses in Ireland when we were talking about thatched roofs. But yeah, we have absolutely also talked about, we have mentioned, there they are, Asinelli and Garisenda, the two most famous tower houses possibly in the world in Bologna. They're looking much more upright than they actually do right now. So this picture dates itself a little bit, but yeah, we have talked about the tower houses in Bologna. But today, for the Italies, I'm focusing on the Palazzo d'Avanzati because I've actually been in it and know lots about it and can share about daily life in it. Let's get past the murder holes, shall we? So we were talking about tapestries and decorative arts, and so the Palazzo d'Avanzati, in that great hall there, which is a public space, absolutely has tapestries. But there was a comment about wall painting. So the Palazzo d'Avanzati is also intensely famous, or it should be more famous than it is, for its amazing 14th century wall paintings. So what you are seeing on the walls here, this is tower and city style in 14th century Italy. The detail on these frescoes is absolutely astounding. So this is how in fact, some of these wall paintings actually look like fabric wall hangings. This beautiful doorway, this is the bathroom. By the way, the Palazzo Davanzati has bathrooms, actual honest to God bathrooms with toilets. And so you can see this, the drape, what looks like a drape of fabric, that's actually supposed to be fur lined. That is lined in vair. So
Okay.
they also had wall hangings that weren't tapestry, they were fabric, but they were entirely lined in squirrel fur in the bellies and the expensive bellies. And so they would actually do wall paintings that imitate fabric wall hangings lined in squirrel fur, so that when it wasn't actually, when you didn't want to have all that extra insulation, like in the summer, you'd still have the beautiful look of lining your walls in squirrel fur, because, you know, that's the flex right there. But yeah, so the Palazzo Davanzati has bathrooms on every single floor, at least 2. And so here you have the entrance to the bathroom, very elegant, very lovely. And then to the right here in the picture, that is actually a garderobe that you lift, and it has a cover, so it keeps the smell out. You lift the cover, you sit on the hole, you do your business, you get up, you cover it again, and you go about your day. So what are the bathroom facilities like in an Irish tower house in the 15th century?
Well,
Or are there none and they're using chamber pots?
it's nowhere near as fancy as that. We do actually have classic toilets, as in you go into the toilet area, and the first thing you would have actually seen is actually clothes. The Irish actually hung up their clothes inside the toilet, and that's to kill off all of the bugs and the various critters and stuff that would have gotten inside of their various cloaks, their woolen tunics. And so they would have used the what's the correct word for it now?
Fumes.
The
Fumes
fumes
is the
from
word
the
you're looking
smell
for.
to actually kill off all the bacteria that was in the likes of their brat cloaks and their woolen tunics and stuff. So when you came in there, you would have seen all of the clothes lined up, and then you would have sat in there, done your business, and it would actually have come down. So it's basically a hole in the side of the castle, and there's
Right.
multiple of them throughout. There's various, when every single time I come across a tour guide and I'm doing my own little spying on them, they always have some wild story to do with like spies and all kinds of stuff going on. And I'm like, oh, I never say it to them. Like, I never like turn around and says, where's your source for that? But I
Right.
always find it really funny how tour guides always have some wild story to do with the toilet area. But the fact of the matter is that they were mostly just used to kill off the bacteria in the clothing, and they would have very, very, like, compared to that, that's very, very super fancy. The castle, the toilets inside of the castles in Ireland, very stripped down, very cold because it's all stone inside there. There's no fancy wooden. Not that I can tell anyway. Maybe there was fancy wooden seat going up and down, but not from what I could see. And it also wouldn't make sense given that they were using the fumes to kill the bacteria. So it's very stripped down, to be quite honest with you. Nothing quite
Right.
fancy.
Yeah, they're pretty sophisticated. Medi makes a comment, makes it look like the hanging is pulled back to enter the room to me. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly the look they're going for, Medi. So it's sort of like, you know, the wall hanging has been tantalizingly pulled aside so you can peek into the bathroom and go in. Yeah. That's exactly the look they're going for. And they would actually bathe in these also. So the bathrooms in the Palazzo Davanzati are proper, like you can do both. There's plenty of room to set up a tub. And there's even a drainage hole in the floor so that if water sloshes out, you know, you can drain your water. So like the Palazzo Davanzati is plumbed. It's a pretty sophisticated, you know, living situation for all of its murder holes and defensive pieces. So let's see, where am I? Right, so furnishings, you know, and here you have an example of one of these early hearths. So the hearth in front of which I'm standing there, that is a 14th century hearth. And that is how it would have been decorated in the 14th century. Heraldry, really big thing. You can see that space is pretty huge. And that is, this room in which I'm standing right now is a solar. We call in English a solar. It is a heated room where the lady of the house would sit with her servants and her family members and her companions and would educate the children. She would also sew, work on project, because women, even aristocratic women in Florence, actually made the small clothes for the men folk, well, for their families, but also the men folk. So the small clothes are the linen things that go against your skin. And often the ladies of the house would actually be in charge of making those, even the well-to-do ladies of the house. We have this letter from Alessandra Strozzi, a woman whose sons were banished from Florence. And they went and they lived in Rome. And so she's got this incredible, intense, very unhealthy correspondence with them, where she's constantly writing them and nagging them about things and also arranging their lives in every minutia, including sending them food. She's like, I've prepared the preserved apples for you. Please make sure you eat them. But she talks about making them shirts and sending them new shirts so that they have their proper supply of new shirts. So this room in which I'm standing right here, this would have absolutely been such a room. And I know I've got a bed. There we go. You can see it from further out. This different angles, all of the same room. And this space, it's you notice it's a little irregular. That's because it was adopted from the second tower house and kind of cut up to fit that. But this would have been sort of an intimate space, the private space in the home, but not entirely private. No one had private lives in the 15th century. No one did. Your servants would often sleep with you in your chamber, for instance. So your intimate, most closest servants would sleep on a trundle bed in your chamber. So, this is the place where a lot of the intimate running of the household happened in this particular house and in similar tower houses all throughout Italy. So, was there a space in tower houses that was dedicated to, the domestic stuff, where the lady of the tower, the lady of the house would have been
At
things?
the very top, if you just go back to the opening image with the stripped down castle, you'll be
Right.
able to see at the very top that you do have the great room. I call it a great room. That's literally what I just made up. I can't remember the specific word
The
right
great
now.
room, right?
What was it called? Well, we have the Great Hall. We might as well give it a great room as well. But it's
It is.
just above the great room. Sorry, the Great Hall. So they can list. There's meant to be. If we go to, it's just actually this one's reverse. I know other ones where it's the other way around, where it's because you could see that in the second last one. So you could see the middle floor. That's the hall where you would have had regular assemblies. Just the middle one is where the regular assemblies would have been held, and also where the commoner, the mercenaries and the retinue and stuff would have had their dinners and stuff, so on and so forth. Then on top of that, you've got where the alleged Taoiseach and Taoiseach would have, which is the leader of the clan, the head of the clan, and also the prince of the clan. They would have, what's it called, slept and stuff, which would have
Right.
been the middle part here. And then at the very top, then at the tippity top, that's the Great Hall. So in this one, it's the Great Hall. But I know other ones, that's actually the reverse, the other way around, where it's the Taoiseach's room would be at the very top of it. And then under that again would be the Great Hall. And it should be set up in such a way, and I have come across tower houses before, where I think it's in Baratti Castle is a very good example. Actually, it's the other way around, where the bedchamber of the Taoiseach of the O'Briens is at the very top, and they have a load of spy holes throughout where they're able to peek in and spy in at what the nobles are saying in the Great Hall. So that's the relationship between the two there. But you could see there with the decoration of how that room is assembled and stuff. And the bed itself is very interesting, because the couple would sleep in the bed, and then the children are sleeping under the bed. So there's a space under the bed for the children to sleep in, which is very, very interesting, because you see this in the O'Brien Castle, and there's other few tower houses as well, where they have the bread frame and stuff, and you can see it's perfectly set up for the couple on top, and then you have the children sleeping under. Very interesting stuff, like.
Well, it's especially because of climate control. The space under the bed, you put bed hangings down, and then that kind of makes this like room within a room effect. So it's much easier to keep things warm under that kind of enclosed situation than to have a bed kind of out in the open, separate.
Especially winter.
The Italian beds in this era, and I don't think I actually have, unfortunately, so there used to be an extant 15th century bed in the Palazzo Davanzati up until like 80 years ago. But it's, I don't know what ended up happening to it, but Italian beds, the ones that are currently in the Palazzo, are unfortunately not 15th century. They are much later. They are like 16th or even 17th century. because a lot of the furnishings that were collected, I'm trying to see where the bedchamber, the actual bed is. The furnishings that were collected by the people, the not Italians who bought the palazzo in the early 20th century, they basically used it to house their Italian antiques collection, but not all of them are actually medieval. That's the kitchen. I don't know where the bed. I should have, unfortunately, I don't have an overview of this the way I would normally have a PowerPoint overview. Okay, there, that. So that bed is absolutely not 15th century. That is a 16th century bed, 100%. But the 15th century style beds were actually settle beds, by which I mean they were actually the bed, the thing on which the mattress set was actually a giant trunk system, a chest system. And so they would store really long. And that's how they stored clothes like the ones you see me wearing. They wouldn't fold them up into a little pile. They would just kind of neatly fold them into a long line of fabric and put them in these long chests. And so that's how you minimize wrinkling on garments back then. You can even see there's a really super long chest at the foot of that bed. If you see, that's still a 16th century style one, but it shows you the kind of length that you would have in these bed settles. So you could actually use them as a bench. You could actually sit on them to, say, put on your stockings and shoes. So they would sometimes have padding on top of the settle part. You could use them for storage. So there wasn't necessarily underbed space, I guess is the point I'm getting to. In most of the the medieval Italian style beds, there wasn't an underbed space. The space under the bed was used for storage. Yes, that's what I'm trying to get to.
It's very God. As you're saying this to me, I'm like, God, I need to get back to Bernati Castle because it's triggering my mind. I can't remember what you're saying is actually in Bernati Castle, or if my mind is tricking me as you're saying this. Because I'm like, I'm sure I've seen that, but I've never confirmed it because I didn't know what I was looking at last time I was in Bernati Castle. But now that you're pointing these things out, I'm like, wait, is that in Bernati Castle or not? No, I definitely have to go back and check. It's also interesting what Susan has said as well about Queen Catherine of Aragon sewing Henry's shirts.
Sorry.
What was it called? Because we see accounts of that happening in Ireland as well, where we have women who take on, because after the Norman conquest of Ireland, because you have a lot of Gaelic men that are kicked to the side, a lot of Gaelic women end up marrying Normans who are active in France, and it's Irish women become very dominant in politics in Ireland. However, it's very interesting that it's like a woman's pride or something, where they get very involved with the politics that's happening in Ireland, and they also get involved with a lot of the accountancy that's happening in Ireland as well. But they're still like, this is my man. And a really great way to show that this is my man is by doing their sewing. And they have all these servants, and yet they're going off their way to, this is mine, and this is my job. This is my man. It's like it fits in with the politics of, the Irish Parliament as well, not only over in England with the English court.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, your linen small clothes are the most intimate thing that you're wearing. They are against all the tender bits. So by sewing the clothes for your persons, you are it's a kind of way of branding them without actually scarring them.
The psychology of that, especially doing it purposely in front of everybody,
right?
It's very interesting.
Here I am. Yeah, here I am. I'm making Don Giovanni's shirt. Respect me.
Yeah. That's absolutely interesting. Like,
Cats Will Be Cats says, now we're in medieval or Tudor Europe, perhaps. Actually, the pictures you're looking at right now are 14th, 15th century Florence. And I really don't like, the word Renaissance and medieval. I think they're outdated and they're not really very effective. They, for the algorithm, like the algorithm loves medieval. It doesn't really care much about Renaissance. So we have to use those terms in titling our videos and whatnot. But I personally try to move away from terms like medieval and try to focus on like the century. Like this is 14th and 15th century, because that comes with an idea that medieval was somehow backwards and lost and benighted and dirty and smelly, and somehow the Renaissance, it's rebirth, so everything is great, but that's not true. None of that's true.
This argument, this exact argument popped up with the academics this month over, I think it was either Medieval Irish Podcast or another one of the Irish medieval spheres or something, about the term medieval. And then I remember someone from Maynooth University turned around and says, yeah, but the word medieval is cool, you know?
I mean, it's a cool word. As a linguist, it's a cool word. Medieval. I mean, it's a fun word. I don't deny that.
Exactly.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah. But it's also nice to be precise, 15th century, because the 15th century and the 10th century, they're two alien planets,
Right, completely.
And it's funny because if you were to get somebody from the 10th century and introduce them to someone from the 15th century, they would think, oh, these people are genius aliens. They're so smart. But if you were to get somebody from the 10th century and get them talking to me, you would think I was an idiot. Sure, I can't even go fishing or anything. Like, how am I supposed to survive in his era? I'm just the biggest moron ever,
Right. Yeah.
So it's very interesting with that massive difference between the 10th century and the 15th century, that they are two different eras,
And I mean, it's someone pointed out, we are closer to Cleopatra VII than Cleopatra was to the construction of the pyramids, the Great Pyramids at Giza, right?
That's a fact,
that's so to just lump it all together into one era it creates a false sense of the realities of culture and history and how they grow and change.
Big time.
Right. So we talked about the bathrooms, so in this picture on the left, we have another example of chests, and chests were not just for storage. They were absolutely, but they were also a consumable good. And they were basically like their Mercedes of their day, because the chest you're seeing by which I'm kneeling there oh so elegantly on the left, that is actually a forziera. That was for a wedding. They call them wedding cassone now, but I haven't found the term cassone in any 15th century source. These were chests that were commissioned in the event of a marriage, usually a wedding, an upcoming wedding. And so there's all sorts of and they're super complex. They're wooden based, and then they're gessoed, and then they're gilt, and they're painted, and they're varnished, and they've got really complex scenery on them that kind of depicts some kind of something about love. Unfortunately, a lot of them got disassembled in the 19th century and sold as individual panels. Right? Yeah, Victorians for the win. Just like what you did with
surprise.
Books. They tore books apart and sold them as individual illuminated pages. But the Italy had a big tradition of painting from across all of the Middle Ages, painting and adorning objects like wood and other furnishings. Does Ireland, I know probably not much has survived, but does Ireland have similar decorative traditions of, say, wall paintings like we see here, or painting chests? Do you know anything about that?
It does seem to be. And once again, as I was saying earlier, I'm pretty sure I saw it in Burnratty Castle. I think there's also gifts over from overseas in Burnratty Castle as well. And I can't tell if my mind is tricking me or not. Do you know what? I'm going to have a quick Google search while you push on a wee bit, and I will.
So we have a while you do that. Susan says, in Italy, where did the children sleep? In a nursery. So it depended on the size of your palazzo and the age. Usually, in the Palazzo Davanzati, there does not seem to have been a separate nursery. Here's another bedchamber. Where you can actually see a cradle. I think that cradle dates to the late 16th, early 17th century, and that bed is 17th century. It's not a very old bed, relatively speaking. But this is one of the upper bed chambers, and there doesn't seem to have been, at least in the Palazzo Davanzati, a dedicated nursery room. Now, granted, we don't have necessarily the kind of records that we would like to have about all of the spaces in this massive structure and exactly how they were used. And also, these are multi-purpose rooms. Like, none of these rooms is purpose-built, really. Okay, the bathrooms. The bathrooms are purpose-built. You're not going to turn any of those bathrooms into your study, probably. But the most of them very clearly have multi-purpose functionality. So you could easily, they're all big. Most of them are pretty big. And so easily any of them could become a bedchamber or a feasting hall or a nursery or whatever, right? there doesn't seem to be in Lorenzo de Medici's palazzo. There is a nursery. There's a room that is indicated as being where the wet nurse stays, and that's probably where the nursery was, because the wet nurse would need to be near the babies, right? But it's still not labeled quite as a nursery as such. Royal palaces in England had them. They did have nurseries. We know that from the records. But Italy seems, at this period anyway, seems to be more multifunctional, at least in Florence, in the Florentine tower houses. Let me see. Everyone talks about Mary burning. Oh, yeah. Getting into a debate about which was bloodier, the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. Well, I'm going to tell you, the Renaissance gets real ugly, guys. What we call the Renaissance. Oh, the wars of religion.
Job. And you think it calms down going into the 1600s, and that's actually the worst. It actually gets worse in Britain and Scotland. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, and the execution methods that everyone says are medieval, they keep using those until the 19th century, guys. England is still hanging, drawing, and quartering people in the 18th century. So
the guillotine doesn't disappear until the 1970s, you know? And now we're believing, there's a huge argument and push since the 70s, but now people are really looking into it, that the guillotine was more cruel than a regular decapitation because the brain didn't realize it was decapitated. So people were still uncomfortable and alive.
Right. Yeah,
so
right.
yes.
Exactly. Uncomfortable and alive somehow. Yeah. Medi says, did servants and soldiers have their quarters on the lower floors? Medi, are you talking about in Ireland? In which case the answer seems to be yes. If you're talking about Italy, actually servants usually lived in a separate building that was adjacent to the palazzo. So if you go to places like Florence and you really start paying attention, you'll notice there's a really nice palazzo, and then there's kind of a whatever building kind of next to it, right swished up to it. The building is where the servants lived. Generally, the closest, most intimate servants, like the ones who maybe are actually have some kind of rank or maybe collateral lines of the family, maybe a widow from one of your cousin's widow or something, they would probably live in the palazzo and serve you as a way to keep their lives going. But kind of like the scullery and that level of servants, they usually lived right adjacent to the palazzo, not in it. When the palazzi start getting bigger and bigger, that changes, but that's after the 15th century, really. Yeah. Servants. So you have where the soldiers are on those bottom floors? The servants are with the soldiers. Where are the servants?
It does seem so. When I was up in Baratti Castle last time, it seemed that the servants, it's either the servants would have stepped on the bottom floor or the second floor. And sometimes it could have been the fact that the servants most likely were on the second floor and the soldiers and the retinue were on the bottom floor itself. Or it could have been mixed. They could have mixed in together. So it depends on the tower house, but it seems most of the time when I went into the likes of Baratti Castle, it was the soldiers and infantry were at the bottom floor, and then it was the servants were on the second floor. But it probably does vary because, as I was saying before, you're not dealing with a society that has peasant and nobles; it's commoners and nobles, and so it's because it's a clan society, so people are much more mixed. So a servant knew the retinue, so people would have, had no problems sleeping together and stuff. There isn't a fact of, I am soldier, this is my rank, respect me. It's much more mixed society. Like, well, they were still warriors. They were still like, a level of worship there. Like, but I don't think it was 100% cut away because society was knitted together. Like.
I mean, it seems to be that way in Scotland too, from what I understand about, similar situation. Whereas, the Italies are very much heavily influenced, even through the Middle Ages, by ancient Roman cultural practices, right? So, that's why you actually have, Roman law and you've got Germanic law, and Roman law doesn't get reintroduced into Northern Europe until like the 11th century. So, that creates a kind of a whole different way of looking at your fellow man almost, right? There are levels, there are better off and less well off, but there's a difference between saying I'm this much above you or I'm this much above you.
Yeah. Because this is why I keep getting into the argument of what is it to it being an Irish word that's kind of being forced into English these days, which is word you see in the the early medieval period. where people apply the word kingdom and tribe to the word tuit, when really tribe and tuit is kind of like more of a cut off word from society. So you have multiple tribes and they have a certain relationship with each other, but not
Mhm.
really.
Ah,
In Ireland, they have the tuit system where they're knitted together. So you have two groups and they're knitted in together. But trying to describe that in English, unless you use a big, massive paragraph of words to describe what is a tuit, is actually
right.
quite difficult. And it wasn't. I spent the last 2 weeks arguing of what is a tuit in the early medieval period, and it wasn't until somebody turned around and says, "You're forcing an Irish word into English. That's the problem. A tuit
Yeah.
is a tuit." You know.
It's no, it's absolutely true. That's actually, as a linguist, some of you don't know, but originally I was a professional translator before the machines ate my career. But
Yeah.
the point is that translation is not about word to word, it's about concept to concept. And
Yeah.
sometimes, often, there are not equivalent concepts from one language to another because the language is so bound up in the culture and the psychology of the culture that you can't just say tribe into it, right? You can't,
Oh
you
yeah,
just
definitely.
can't. There's too much nuance, too many really important implications that are going to get lost and probably completely misconstrued by a charged
That's
word
the
like
problem.
tribe.
Yeah, yeah. That's the problem I have with the word in the early medieval period. I have with the word tribal and kingdom. Now, don't get me wrong. When you go into the High Middle Ages and the late medieval period, High Middle Ages, I don't really have a problem with the word kingdom. And then when you go into the late medieval period, just the clan system, you're dealing with clans, so it's more easier for us modern people to then understand what's
Right.
going on in the medieval period. On that note, thank you so much, guys. I think we just hit 100 messages, and we've just got a big congratulations off the streaming station. So
Well,
I
I
got
didn't
that.
get a
You get
congratulatory
the
message.
notification? I got a notification at the side.
What the
Well done
hell?
for hitting
It's
100.
my damn stream. I think I
Well,
think I think it's
congratulations to
because
me.
I think it's because your people are the ones who are doing more. Your people are more the ones doing the commenting. It's okay. Come on, creative contestants, give me more comments.
Thanks, guys. Anyway, for the 100, for the what was it called? The achievement I just got.
Yeah, that's right. Yay for cookies. That and $10 will get you a Starbucks coffee.
Nice.
Yeah, so let me see. So kitchens, food. Let's talk about food briefly. So food is
Yeah.
a super important component of domestic life, in my opinion, and I do believe other people agree. We already talked about the back end of eating, i.e. the bathroom. Let's talk about the front end of eating, i.e. the kitchen. Okay, so in the palazzo, in Italian, medieval Italian homes, tower homes, the kitchen is maybe, I'm not certain about the super tall ones in Bologna, but in the Florentine ones, the kitchen is on the top floor.
Yeah.
Can
Same
you
Ireland.
guess why you'd want to put the kitchen on the top floor?
So, can I answer this one?
Yeah,
Or
go ahead.
wait for the guys.
Can you
Right. So in
can you guess
Ireland,
why
we're
you would want
very
that?
nasty. We're very nasty in Ireland. So the reason for it can be found in Bunratty Castle. And sorry, no, the Blarney Castle. In the Blarney Castle, you could, because it's stripped down, you can see exactly the pot, and then you can see, the where they would throw it over. So
Right,
straight away, it literally gives it away that this is used during times of siege. They would bring the boiling hot water and whatever's going on in
right.
the kitchens over to the siege. And because it's the McCarthy's were sieged by the Tudor English, the O'Briens, the Desmond Fitzgeralds. So when those people are sieging in, they would get the boiling hot water. Oh, and I learned an even more nasty one. Can I be a wee bit nastier on
Yeah,
this?
yeah, of course, yeah. I mean,
So they would get even more nasty, and they would use the pot as a toilet. So as the siege would go on, they would
nice
use the pot as what was it, as a toilet. And so they would
biological
get on it.
warfare.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Would get on that boiling hot and then throw it way
oh,
over the castle, and throw it on top of the likes of the O'Briens, the
nice.
Desmond Fitzgeralds, and the Tudor English. So there, have it.
Fantastic. So in Italian tower houses, they put the kitchens on top, not usually for that reason. Actually, the answers are correct. Fire, because you don't want if the kitchen catches on fire, and it's probably going to happen, then only the kitchen will burn if it's on the
Mm,
top floor. If your kitchen's on any lower floor, you say goodbye to your palazzo. So
okay.
at some point, I guess they learned that lesson the hard way, I'm going to assume. And after enough people's tower homes burnt up they started putting them on the top. Because even though, you think about it, it's like, does that make sense? You have to haul all of your food supplies up to the top. Someone has to carry it up all those stairs. But they had pulleys, actually. They had pulley systems whereby they could actually lift from the street. They could actually lift loads of goods, wrapped in a cargo net and on a rope up to the top. So they didn't have to carry it up the stairs. And if you don't see these, so if you sometimes see the pulley system still intact in Italy, but more often if you go to the Netherlands, a lot of the merchants' houses there still have their intact pulley system. So if you want to see what that looked like in the Middle Ages, pop up to Delft. You can see it. Yeah, so this is what the kitchen looks like in the Palazzo d'Avanzati now. You can see by the door there's that massive pulley. That is the pulley for the well system, the internal water distribution system. And it controls, I assume it must control it controls the whole way. The thing that I didn't notice is whether there were pulleys at the other level. So I'm not certain how they instructed people on, hey, we want water on the first floor. Hey, we want water on the second floor, when the pulley seems to only be here in the kitchen at the very top. But yeah, I mean, the place you're probably going to need the most water in any given day in any medieval operation is going to be the kitchen, right? Because
Yeah.
no one is bathing fully every day. That's just not happening. They might have a basin of water, and they are absolutely cleaning their bodies. But guess what, people? You don't need to have a shower or a bathtub to keep your body clean. Shocking. Yeah. So the kitchens, you can see the hearth. You can see it's a big open space because, again, medieval spaces were meant to be modular. So unlike a modern kitchen where you have, counters built into the walls and you've got sinks, the medieval kitchen would have had a series of tables, wooden tops on trestles that you could disassemble as needed and move around, so that if you needed to create a massive production space for, say, a banquet for 300 people, which often happened, you could set up more. But if you didn't need all that counter space, you would just take it down. So do you know anything about the Tower House kitchens? Were they also modular? Did they have permanently built-in counters? What was the situation there?
It seems very similar to what you just described there, to be quite honest with you, from what I remember from Blarney Castle. Right now, I can't remember what Blarney Castle, what their kitchen looks like. I'll be very cheeky now and cheat. And we have it. Actually, it's all wooden counters and stuff from what I can see.
Right. Let me see if I can.
That's
that's not one of the pictures you sent me, right?
It's none of the. I didn't think about sending kitchens or anything. I didn't
Right.
realize we were going to go into that sort of detail. But yeah, it seems to be. It was originally all wooden things. If you look at the second floor, because the first two photos I think are from the Folk Park itself. But yeah, it's interesting. We also have Turtle. What's it called? Because I remember this as last time I was up there. But yeah, it seems to be all wooden counters and stuff.
Right.
Nothing that's properly built in there. And then it seems very, very similar to what we see in Florence, except for the added fact of the turtle. What was it? The turtle shells. That's it. Which I'm wondering where they come
turtle
from.
shells. That's a thing that people start doing that in like the 17th century, sort of the end of the 16th century. They start adding all these like exotic talismanic objects that it's kind of ties in with the rise of alchemy, and yeah, and you want to fill your spaces with things like that. I mean, I suspect the turtle shell probably wasn't there originally. It was probably whoever lived there had a curio collection. Probably they developed in the 17th century, and then they've put some of the curio collection on display. It happens all across Europe too, where you'll find like dried, desiccated, mummified alligators hanging from the ceilings. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. This was generational, that the O'Briens had lived here for 400 years or so.
Right,
Yeah, that's not
exactly.
surprised.
It's part of their cabinet of crap.
Yeah. That all makes sense there.
Everyone has their cabinet of crap, right? And,
Yeah.
and when you die, your heirs go, "What the frack am I supposed to do with this?"
Well, look, thank God the O'Briens were just like, oh, we need to preserve this. Remember, we're the kings of Ireland, so
Yeah,
thank God
that's
for
right.
that.
So question, were there dumbwaiters to take the food to lower levels?
Waiters.
You would think that there would have been dumbwaiters in in the Palazzo Davanzati, but there is no evidence of it. So there's these poor servants. They figured out about buckets on pulleys, but I guess not about platforms on pulleys. So yeah,
Who
they would have to transport the food down manually by
yeah.
hand.
Who
Yeah,
cares about the lower classes, huh? Only
seriously.
commoners anyway, huh?
It's part of their remuneration package.
Yeah.
The fitness pass is actually the stairs that they
Why
have
weren't
to
they
take,
born nobles, huh? Why
right?
weren't they born nobles? Why can't they just eat cake, huh?
Micha, good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Takeda, lovely to see you here. We're actually coming to the end of our presentation, just because I have other things I need to do today.
Uh,
And this was a test run, but I thought it went really well
oh,
on this.
amazingly. I'm surprised how good looking it looks.
Yeah, this is
But
our new streaming software that allows us to do all kinds of cool things.
and
Like
I want
I
to thank Rachel for that as well. Like,
Yeah. So are there any questions about living in an Irish medieval tower house, so 15th century-ish, or living in a Florentine tower house? What like, any kind of more specific questions? Going to open up the floor to any final questions that we might be able to address before we part ways. But note that we have lots of fun planned for you guys. This isn't it. This was just a taster. On the weekend, of course, I'll have my usual medieval crafting sewing party on Saturday morning, Friday evening, depending on where you are. Then Philip and I will be back together, really for real. We're really going to do it this time. Please work technology. Um, on Sunday morning, way too early, Asia time, or Friday or Saturday afternoon, late evening, depending on where you are in the world for the rest of you. We'll be talking about medieval Irish textiles. We've got so much fun to discuss, lots of fun things to share, eye-opening revelations about the medieval Irish world and their fashions. So please join us for that. Opinions, let me see how, oh, whatever.
here, you'd
Opinion,
have to ask your mother about that one. Ha ha
mm,
ha.
oh my God, whatever. Good God. Yeah, the medieval stairmaster program. Exactly, Takeda. You picked up what I was putting down about medieval remuneration benefits. Um, oh, unfortunately, I don't think I have the usual power. Oh yeah, I do. Okay. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Opinions on chinoiserie. If you're talking about the way in the 18th century that there was this kind of exotic addition to fashion and to interior decor, I think it made everything really elegant and delicate. Yeah, I really love the combinations, the way they started importing all that Ming Dynasty porcelain, and the clothing started taking on this more exotic aspect. I always love it when fashion goes fusion. It's the best.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay. Any other questions about 15th century tower houses or 15th century living in general? I think the takeaway is that people can come up, whether, who knows if the tower house idea, evolved in Southern Europe and made its way, to Northern Europe.
Mm.
Parallel development is really a thing throughout history. And, similar circumstances kind of tend to lead to similar solutions. So, it's often hard to trace this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when it appears in the 15th century, like, is it a case of it's developing because of the conventional warfare that we see with the Hundred Years' War in France, or as you see it there, is it the likes of the Fitzgeralds that are influenced by what's happening in Florence? Is that what's causing the influences in there? Is it a case of the Irish trying to adapt to the cattle raiding warfare that's happening in the northwest of the country, or is it the conventional warfare that we see down in the Leinster area? Is that what's causing the changes to Castle, or is it all of the above?
Right.
Why not have all these adaptations and changes? Why not have this constant adaptation and changing happening going on? All I know is that further research really needs to get done, and that means supporting archaeological work that's happening
Yeah.
in Ireland. And right now, both Ireland and various other countries around the world, we have absolutely terrible governance going on, and so we need to support governments that support archaeological digs happening in these areas, and also preserving our history.
Yeah.
That's all I know. And it's definitely something I'll continue to support, especially against our present government, which is absolutely bloody terrible.
I don't know. Is your government rescinding funding from universities that don't toe a horrible, horrible party line? Because mine is.
We'll not go down that elephant
Yeah,
or was it
seriously.
rabbit hole, because Jesus.
Oh yeah. So comment that tower houses look like townhouses. Yeah, again, town. So in the Italy's, of course, in these city states, you've got massive crowding because safety in numbers and safety within the walls. So they're living in tight quarters, so they build up instead of out. And so, the similar idea, a lot of townhouses in the modern townhouses are in places where land is expensive or not highly available. So you build together instead of having McMansions on 30 acres of, property or whatever. Let me see. What's fascinating about these tower houses or whatever is that they have the same amenities as a castle would. Yep. It's true, and in fact, a lot of the tower houses, because of their height, they have to come up with even more innovative solutions than a castle would.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Well, Philip and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Philip from Irish Medieval History. I'm Rachel from The Creative Contessa. And we hope you check out each other's channels. We've each got unique content that interlaces very nicely. So make sure to support my colleague Philip over on Irish Medieval History. Philip, any final words for our viewers?
Rachel, thank you so much for setting this up today. This is all Rachel's work, guys. I've been a complete nightmare to work with. Rachel's been telling me to A, B, and C, and I've just been driving it into the wall for her for crack. I just thought it was hilarious, just to make her life hell. But eventually she did manage to get around all the complications that we had. We're still working and adapting it, obviously, but you could see, like, this setup is absolutely amazing. Fantastic. Rachel, thank you so much for that. And once again, guys, I'm going to be, as Rachel was saying earlier, I am doing a class on, what was it called? The Irish Vikings over in England next Sunday. We'll be talking about more administration and all that kinds of stuff to do with women's history and that. So definitely, if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely head over to my channel, join up on the Patreon, and see if you would like to join up with the classes and stuff. Other than that, guys, thank you so much. And also, thank you for hitting the 100 mark. That's also a huge deal for myself and Rachel to definitely get those comments in there, which is so good for our algorithm system, both for myself and Rachel. And other than that, thank you so much, Rachel, for everything you've pretty much done, not just today, but over the whole year.
No, thank you. Sorry, someone was asking me I can't tag channels as such, not here anyway, but Irish Medieval History is the, yeah, there, pop through. Irish Medieval History is Philip's channel.
There we go.
Yeah. And I'm the Creative Contessa, because I don't know. I guess it just shows you as Philip. Can you change? Maybe you can change your name next time to Philip from Irish Medieval History. Then, yeah, that'd probably be better. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope we can see you on the weekend.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah. And don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Hit the bell, all the things. Okay, everyone. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, and evening. Stay creative. I don't know how to end the stream. Oh, there it is.